I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. Welcome back to the show and Happy New Year, Hilliard.
Happy New Year, Jim.
Boy, you have a lot on our plate today. The Globe and Mail doing a story about how people are getting around the new mortgage rules. Can you maybe talk about that?
Yeah, so what happens is when people try to buy a house with a 5% down payment or 10% down payment, the law says they're required to get approval for CMHC, and that involves checking out your employment and a bunch of other fairly stringent things like credit scores and all that. So on the other hand, if you can come up with 20% down payment, a lot of that goes away, and it becomes much easier to buy a house. So what some people are doing is they'll try and buy the house. They'll go to the mortgage broker or whoever, and they'll say, well, you know what, I don't think you're going to qualify if we try and put you through the CMHC. So we've got this other lender, which is called a shadow banker, if you like, and you can borrow 15% of the down payment from them, or 15% down payment from them, put in your 5, and then we'll bring you up to 20, and then we can make CMHC go away. And apparently that is on the rise, according to the Globe and Mail story. And it's been around forever, like it's not new, but what is new is the number of people that are taking advantage of it. So it is quite onerous in the sense that the interest rate on this second loan is quite high. Like the mortgage loan might be 3%, but the second loan could be as high as 10%. And but it does get around. If somebody doesn't have, maybe they haven't had a regular job for the last 4 years or something like that, then it might be difficult to qualify for the CMHC. So, and it avoids the CMHC insurance premium, which can be, 3.5% kind of thing. So, the other thing I'm told, by people who are in this shadow banking industry is that even though the interest rate is 10 or 15%, a lot of the people that borrow from the shadow lenders believe that they're going to pay it back right away. So they're in their minds, they're thinking, well, I'm only borrow it for a year, so it's not going to be that much money. And of course, when I asked them, I said, well, how many of them actually do pay it back that quickly? And he said, oh, basically none of them do. So yeah, once they get into that, they tend to borrow, and then it gets very expensive because they're usually 1-year loans, or maybe they might be 2-year loans or something. But then you have to get them renewed, and often there's a renewal fee involved as well. So the Globe and Mail story is highlighting something that's been around for a long time, but it's been kind of in the shadows and nobody really knew about it. So on another interview I did today, I was asked, do you think we should tighten up the rules? And I said yes, because the whole point of having all these rules is so that people actually come to the table when they're going to buy a house with a fairly substantial chunk of money saved up first before they do, or they qualify with employment and other factors. So if we don't apply the rules, if there's a loophole that allows people to get around the rules, then it puts the whole system at risk, because as soon as some people start defaulting on some of those other loans, the bundled loans, people start to get nervous, and then they don't want to lend their money, and then the whole system, as we saw in 2009, can seize up, and that affects everybody. Even the more conventional lenders could be hurt, and the conventional home buyers that have the sufficient down payment could be hurt by the actions of a few people that start to default.
Also, Equifax did a poll saying that Canadian mortgage fraud is up, and one of the reasons they say that is 11% of the people they talked to said it's okay to lie to get a mortgage.
It's absolutely right. I think it's 11% that admitted it, but I suspect it's even higher than that in terms of because their attitude would be, well, who am I? I'm not really hurting anybody. As long as I make my mortgage payments, and I think I've asked several lenders as well. I've said, like, what if you did find out that somebody was in trouble? Like, my question was a little different. My question was, what if the mortgage comes up for renewal, and the house has actually dropped in value, and so now the mortgage is bigger than the value of the house? And the answer came back, as long as they're making their payments, we would probably leave them alone, because why would we bother them? So it would be the same with this. So somebody lies on the mortgage application. I've heard this from many people that say, well, what's your job? Well, I'm just starting out in the financial advisor role, and how much do you make? $60,000. Well, how much does the average financial advisor make? I say, well, probably $90,000. Okay, well, we'll put down $90,000, because in a couple of years you'll be up to $90,000, right? And the guy says, yeah, I guess so, probably. He doesn't know if he's going to make it in the industry, but yeah. So they put down $90,000. So if somebody even checked on that, if they made the phone call to that company and said, is he a financial advisor with your company? And then they said, the next question is, it says here 90,000 is the wage. Is that the normal for your people? Because I don't think they're allowed to divulge exact incomes. And the answer on the phone would be, yeah, that's probably about normal for somebody in that role. And then, so there's no harm done, right? That's the attitude, right? But the problem is that it allows people to get in over their head, and that's why, personally, I think it should be tightened up, because encouraging people to get into too much debt that they can't afford is not good for them. For their particular family situation, it's going to be stressful, but it's also not good for the overall society. Plus, it pushes house prices up, which hurts everybody that's trying to buy. And that's not a good thing either.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. Hilliard, coming up on our show, This Week in Money this weekend, Mark Cohodas, who's been called the world's greatest short seller and trader, told us that he expects low-end real estate in Vancouver to perhaps fall 50% of its peak value and the high-end stuff to fall maybe 80%. Are his predictions true, or are they something that's just imaginary?
Well, I actually met Mark in New York. There was a conference in the fall, a really good conference actually, Jim Grant Interest Rate Observer, and he was there with a number of other people. And it generally tends to be a group of skeptical people at that conference. And Mark presented, and his presentation was about the Canadian real estate market and how it was overvalued. So we got chatting because of my book, of course, and his position. And he's obviously very intelligent, very, very knowledgeable. Like he does a tremendous amount of personal research. He lives in California, and he has chickens that he raises. And he's often been on BNN, and he tends to be a little bit, flamboyant, I guess, in his predictions. So he draws a lot of attention that way as well. But as I understand it, now I don't know exactly why he picked those numbers, but I think one of the ways you could get to that 80% number on the high end is if you believed that the current bubble started in 2000, and if you believed also that all bubbles burst, and they burst to take the price trend right back to the trend line that was in place before the bubble started to be inflated, which is what I say in my book, then you have to actually take Vancouver prices down about that much, about 80% to get to the previous trend line. It's a phenomenal thing to even consider. And I don't imagine it would happen to all houses in any particular category, but I think it is possible that a $5 million house might sell for $1 million before this is over, which would be, I think that's 80%. So if there's enough $5 million houses for sale, and if somebody's desperate enough to have to get rid of it, then that's what would happen. One of the examples, Mark didn't use this example, but I will. If you get a situation where a lender has lent a bunch of money, and often we're in that phase in Alberta right now where the lenders say, give them some more time, and, let them work this out. But there's another phase that comes after that, which is where the lender gets more ruthless about things. And they turn it over to a realtor and they just say, get rid of it. We are the First Bank of Edmonton or whatever, and we're not in the business of holding real estate. That's beneath us, right? So they just give it to a realtor. They've already written off the loss on their books anyway, so they don't really care. And they just give it and they say, dump it onto the market. Well, that's the kind of situation where you could get a $5 million house selling for $1 million. I mean, who's to say it's worth $5 million? If you go back to 1995, it probably traded at $1 million. So there's nothing that magic about that current number, other than you've got a bunch of speculators that have been pushing prices up and up and up, and whether they be from foreign or whether they be domestic. And once those speculators leave, and that, of course that would have to happen before this kind of a drop could ever occur. But once those speculators leave, who's left? And there's so few people in the world that can normally afford a $5 million house. If they decide that Vancouver is no longer the place and Seattle's the new place, then it could be very difficult to sell that $5 million house. And now most people in that situation would say, I'm not selling. I'm not going to let it go for $1 million when I paid $5 million for it. They would just sit on it. But as I say, if a lender takes over and a lender doesn't care, because they've already written off the loss on their books, then they just dump it on the market for whatever they can get for it.
Another question somebody posed to us: if someone rents out the basement of their principal residence, then sells their house, do they have to pay or declare a capital gain or loss on the rented out portion of the house or the entire house?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it definitely does affect the tax situation, and I'm not the right person to give you a definitive answer on that, but I do understand that I saw some incredible statistic about Vancouver that something like as many as 50% of the people have they call them mortgage helper suites, right? So now whether they're, the other thing, if you want to get into the taxes, about they should be reporting that income as an income, and then they should be deducting the expenses of the cost of making the suite the way it is and all that sort of stuff. So my guess is most people are probably not, some people at least are probably not reporting all that. But the basic rule about the tax exemption is if it's regularly occupied by the owner. Owner occupied is the rule. And so that would at least apply to part of it, for sure. And I don't think having a suite in the basement would lose the whole exemption, but it might lose a portion of it. But I would check with somebody that knows better than me.
A tax lawyer.
Well, yeah, I think any accountant. Although, it's interesting that this is one of the changes that has not gotten much publicity. I think you and I talked about it a few months ago, but this requirement that everybody's going to have to file a form with CRA every time they sell a house, whether it's owner occupied or not, whether it qualifies for the principal resident exemption or doesn't, is going to have a big impact on the market, because I think up until now, most people, it's been on your honor. You just, if you feel you have to pay tax on it because you weren't living in it, it wasn't principal residence, then you voluntarily offer to pay tax on that. Well, you can imagine it being voluntary, and a lot of people don't understand the rules to start with. There's probably not that many people that were volunteering to pay. So now that they've required, and I think the part of that will be that they will get a form from either the realtor or from land titles. I don't know how that's going to work. They'll be able to check anyway, I'm sure. If you don't file a form, they're going to come after you and say you sold your house, you didn't pay for the gain, you have to pay tax. So it's going to get very interesting. And I think the reason that maybe it might be hard to find somebody that knows the answer to that question you just asked a minute ago, is that people up until now haven't really been worrying about that stuff.
Of course, if you're selling a condo, you probably don't have to worry about it.
Well, I mean, I think if somebody buys a condo, and I understand a lot of people have done this, I've talked to many of them actually, and they don't move into it themselves, they rent it out. I think they're pretty much aware that that's an investment property, not a principal residence. But the situation where you're living in the place, but you're also renting out a piece of it, that's an interesting question. And I've heard about. I've heard this so many times. It must be very widespread. I've heard about people, really stretching to get into a house, and they actually move into the basement of the house, and they rent out the bigger part of the house to the tenant in order to get a larger payment to help with the mortgage. So it's a crazy world out there, and why would people tie themselves? So the fundamental thing that's behind almost everything we talked about today, the bundled mortgages, the fraud, and this suite in the basement thing, is this very widespread belief that house prices always go up. And if that turns out to be incorrect, if house prices can actually go down, none of this makes any sense. Like committing mortgage fraud on your application doesn't make any sense. Borrowing at a really high interest rate to bundle the mortgage with another loan doesn't make any sense. And why would you get yourself into a house that you couldn't afford, where you had to actually take in roommates in order to survive? That doesn't make any sense either. If house prices are going down, or even if they're just flat, it only makes sense from a speculator's point of view if house prices continue to rise. And they won't. They've risen for a long time now. They've risen a lot, but they won't continue forever to rise.
What about contrasting Toronto's market right now to Vancouver, where Vancouver has seen sales, flatten out or drop? Toronto, year to year, especially for luxury homes, they say those sales have gone up 77%.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things going on in Toronto, and it is, a couple of years ago, they were talking about Toronto and Vancouver are a different market from the rest of Canada, and then now it's basically down to Toronto. I think Vancouver has fallen out of the category, though the numbers in December for November showed a small decline in prices. It was a huge drop in volume, but a small. We'll see in the middle of January in another few days here when December numbers come out. But in terms of, there certainly wasn't an increase in Vancouver. So Toronto's basically the only place left in Canada where you're getting those big double-digit increases. And I don't think it'll last. I think something will happen. I've talked to lots of people in Toronto that own multiple properties. They're buying like 5 or 6 condos in new buildings, or they've heard of people doing that. They're not doing it themselves. Again, none of it makes any sense unless prices keep rising at 5 or 10% a year, which mathematically is impossible. And so at some point, for some reason, it'll change. I mean, who would have guessed a year ago that Vancouver would change so rapidly? Even before the change in the foreign buyers tax and the empty houses tax and the CRA requirements changed and the CMHC mortgage changed, Vancouver had already started to soften for no reason that anybody really knows. So the same thing can happen to Toronto. We just don't know what the catalyst will be. But one of the things we haven't talked about is the possibility of rising interest rates, and that gets into Donald Trump and the new economic policies in the United States. So that would probably be a topic for another day.
It certainly will. Hilliard, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. If you have any questions for our show, you can email us at info@housestreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.